an introduction. That's quite a lot of pressure. And, well, hi, everyone. Really nice to see you. There's a lot of familiar faces here tonight. It's quite a strange feeling being on this side of the room because I'm so used to sitting where you are. So thanks for having me tonight. It's nice out. So I wanted to talk about Matter, the work that we do, and actually how I got there in the first place. So I launched Matter in September 2015 during the London Design Festival. So we work across education, industry, designing and implementing how materials can create a more responsible future, looking at how materials can shape the now, the near, and the far future. So we work in 3 different time frames. So between 1 to 5 years, which is the immediate future, 5 to 15 years, which is the near future, and then 15 years plus, which is the far future. This image here is our main page on our website, and it's in the form of a periodic table, which relates to the materials that make up our world, as everything is made of something. So to give you a bit of context about my background, and it will help you understand why I decided to create Matter. So I started off by studying jewelry and silversmithing as a BA, decided that wasn't right for me because it wasn't experimental enough. I then went on to do a multimedia textiles course at Loughborough, and then finally ended up on an MA at CSM, which is now called Material Futures, about 9 years ago. And that involved smart textiles, which encompassed working with electronics, programming, coding, circuitry, and then sustainable textiles and innovative textiles. So this quote here explains quite a lot with what textiles actually is. So textiles is older than bronze and as new as nanowires. Textiles are technology, and they have remade our world time and time again. So after my MA, I went on to work within the automotive industry and within Nissan, and I was a color material finish designer. So I was working within interiors and exteriors. And this is one of the cars that I worked on, which was a Nissan Cube car. So for example, this is what an interior looks like for the car. So you can understand, like, within the car, you have like dashboard, so that requires metal, soft finishes within seating, and all sorts of things. And it's part of the experience, and you're addressing different lifestyles and needs and wants. And then I also worked at this amazing company called United Visual Artists. So we worked on this project here called Volume, which was at the V&A. And it was an interactive installation where people would interact with these pillars, and they would change color, movement, and all sorts of things. So I was learning about experiential design, interactive design, color and materials was a big part of that. So this project is probably one of my favorite things I've ever done. I got to do my dream. I used to be a basketball player for Leicester way back in the day. And so Nike Jordan approached me and asked me if I wanted to collaborate on one of their collections, which was the Nike Jordan 29. So I'm kind of showing my age here because I remember the first ones that came out. And the concept was, so this was for Chinese New Year 2015. And the concept behind it was water, because they didn't want to focus on the year of the goat because it was just going to last for a year. And it was a limited edition, and we made a complete capsule collection. I actually almost missed out on this project because I ignored the email, and I didn't even realize it was from a Nike.com email address. I was like, oh, this is a strange email. Oh, it's a weird person that wants to work with me again. So I ignored it completely. And then later on, reread the email, and I was like, oh shit, it's Nike. So yeah, I almost missed out, but thankfully I didn't. So I created this huge canvas of hand-painted water, sort of liquid, fluid sort of feeling, basically. I wanted to create a lot of depth and movement. So yeah, it was quite mixed media, I guess, and then manipulated it digitally as well. So the capsule collection involved caps, clothing, branding, and even packaging. Actually, probably the box is my favorite thing because everything matches throughout the whole thing, and there's a really nice tissue paper involved as well. And then this was the best thing ever. It was Ai Weiwei wearing my cap, and I was just like, this just is the dream. So, yeah. And he posted this on Instagram, so I was pretty hyped. And then more recently, I got to work with Beyonce, which was quite mental. And I designed all of her textiles within her Autumn/Winter 16 Ivy Park collection. So, as you can see, I've done quite a wide range of industries, and they all encompass working with materials. So, in hindsight, it really enabled me to understand what connected all of these experiences together, and that was the material. So, I decided to embark upon this quite crazy journey on created matter, because it was something that really meant a lot to me. And materials is a subject that really isn't recognized. And it's something that really needs to be highlighted because it's such an important part of every single one's process, whatever industry you are in or whatever you do. And you'll understand that once I talk through the projects that we do. So, what is a material? It's a very big question. But what I believe is materials provide the missing link between all industries. Nick Cave puts it really perfectly. He says, it's the invisible things that have so much mass. So I want to start by explaining how we work. And this is part of our methodology, and this is the first stage of how we work within any project. So we think about the identity first, and that means the material has their own characteristics and behaviors. So whether it's something it's textured or soft or cool or warm. And then you're thinking about a space. So if you're designing a space, you think you want to feel a certain way within that space. So whether you want to contemplate in that space or you want to feel warm and cozy, there's like different sorts of human behaviors, I guess, that go along with that. So the material can lend itself to that space and the person experiences it, and that's how they're all connected. So this has not happened yet, so this is an exclusive. And I'm really excited about this project because we get to work in a live environment. So it's this store called Clerkenwell London, and we're redesigning one of their interior spaces. And this space is called the Vinyl Lounge. And so it's reflective of sound, and you experience sound within that space. But how we've approached it is thinking about its location and its functionality. So the Vinyl Lounge is set between their restaurant, their wine library, and their fashion retail space. So how we've approached it is thinking about how you can wayfind through that space with materials. So materials can provide a communication tool. So towards the restaurant, we're going to be using food-based materials, and these tiles here are made from corn husk waste. And husks are normally just burnt, and they create an incredible amount of pollution. So, and then the third largest crop in the world that's grown. So actually, it's quite a big problem. And materials can solve these problems. And you can create byproducts with them and also create new economies. So which means that these people that are growing like the farmers, so the agricultural industry, are able to gain an extra income in the seasons that they're not growing the crops. And this here is denim waste tiles. So the fashion industry produces an incredible amount of waste, as you probably all know. So these tiles will be heading towards the fashion space. So there's a relationship between where you're going and where you might end up. So what's really interesting about these tiles is they don't actually look like denim. So there's like this curiosity about it. It looks more like a wood grain or a marble. So it feels like it adds value or brings more value to a once discarded product. And then we will use fabric for locating the wine library. So we've chosen fabric because it's more like fluid, it's like a liquid. And we're going to be naturally dyeing them with either ingredients from the wine or tannins. And finally, for the vinyl lounge, we're going to be using like acoustic material. So these tiles here reflect, absorb, and diffuse sound around the space. And there's like a three-dimensional quality to these tiles, distributing sound across the room. And this will provide like a full multi-sensory experience, and there's like an intuitiveness about it as well. And it really lends itself to what Clerkenwell London's ethos is. So we'll be launching this space in April, so I hope to see some of you there. And following from that, we work within life cycles. So this is the next stage of our methodology. And what that means is we look at the raw material, where it comes from, how it's currently used, how it degrades, and then if there's potential for it to be reused in some way. So we're in the process of working with Hatto and with their press and their studio. And so we've approached this by understanding what do they have lots of, and that's paper. And how can their waste actually turn into a resource of some sorts? So what we've done is produced a couple of experiments where we've basically turned the paper back into a wood by compressing it and combining it with a binding agent. So it's kind of turning back into its original material. So these are just examples of what that looks like. So they produce really beautiful patterns, and it looks like a wood grain of some sorts. And we're hoping to turn them into paper-related products. So the material has a relationship with the end use. So these are just a few examples of what they could look like. So a pencil holder, a paper tray, or a paperweight. So these are things that we're just experimenting with at the moment. So they're not a final product just yet. But these are just examples of how they could potentially look. So, and we'll also be turning them into workshops with Hatto Press. So that would be really interesting to experience as well. And then finally, moving on to systems. And this is the final stage of our methodology. So we look at longevity. And what that means, we're looking at the sharing economy or no ownership, how the product or life cycle of that product could prolong its life in some way. Modularity, that means creating like modular systems within one product or service. Versatility, so one ingredient being used in many ways. And then ability, so you're enabling people of how you can potentially reuse materials, like precious plastics is a really great example of that. So I was recently commissioned by Frame magazine in their latest issue, and they asked me to design a travel product for Mars. So this kind of blew my mind a little bit. I was just like, I can design for Earth, let alone Mars. So I normally, with a brief, I normally ask a question. And everything we do is thinking about what something is made of. So I wanted to understand what Mars is made of. So after a lot of heavy research, I discovered that Martian dust was the most abundant resource. And you could possibly call this an invisible resource of sorts, as you wouldn't traditionally consider dust as a material. But lots of designers are actually working with this at the moment. So there's a designer, she's working with marble dust and pine resin, and she's using a natural pigment to make these really incredibly looking vessels. So there's movement within that. So this is a picture of the Mars rover, and at the moment, with this image, it's covered in dust on a constant basis. And then this is what it looks like when it doesn't have dust, so it can actually function and operate and provide the research tools that we need to understand the life on Mars, if there is any. Because humans are about to, well, basically visit Mars quite soon in the next 3 years. Well, Elon Musk's Mars adventure, well, that was the whole principle behind this commission in the first place. And the other materials that exist on Mars are iron and silicon. So these materials could be mined and extracted in some way. So after a lot of research and much deliberation, because I kind of had an issue with this brief, so I was like, well, I wouldn't take anything from Earth. Why would I contaminate a planet from foreign materials with a planet that doesn't have an atmosphere? So it's not protected in any way. So really, I would actually just take a camera. That's all I would take. So I kind of turned the project on its head a little bit. So I decided to design a manual of how you can create your own Martian structures with indigenous materials. So the regolith, which is Martian dust and silicon, can create a brick-like structure. And the iron could create the structural components of the building. So you could potentially have a building made from indigenous materials. So yeah, I just thought that was the most logical way to have people engage with what actually is around you and exists around you. So the silicon actually could produce a mortar as well, so you could lay the bricks really well. So yeah, this was like quite a mind-blowing project for me, but bring me a challenge. It's all good. I will try my best to resolve it with materials. And our team is pretty good, so yeah, bring it on.